The Spin-Off Podcast Network. Skinny are helping you show how smart you are with the 1Q quiz, an all-new, super challenging and super quick daily quiz built by the Spin-Off. Every Monday, Skinny are giving you the chance to prove you're smart with the Skinny Extra Credit question. Get it right, and you'll get the chance to score yourself some Skinny Extra mobile credit, so you can text, call, or even video call your group chat and gloat about how big your brain is. T's and C's apply.
The Fold is brought to you by oMedia, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. No mai, huki mai kia The Fold, e mihi nei ko Duncangree tōku ingoa. My guest today is Nathan Rarere, who is many things. His current gig, and one I think he is absolutely crushing, is host of First Up, which is an RNZ show that you might not have heard of or have heard. It runs from 5 till 6 a.m. weekdays, which is a time some people like to sleep. I'm up and I hear it most days for some proportion of it, and I've liked First Up since its inception. Indra Stewart was the debut host, but I think Nathan over the past year or so has really brought a different sensibility to it, and actually to RNZ as a whole. We talk a lot about his history as a broadcaster, but what he brings to First Up is a really kind of laid back and slightly, digressive and fun sensibility. And he does do sort of statement interviews, and he speaks to the finance minister and the deputy leader of the opposition. He covers Ukraine, and it's there what you need, but it's also there's just more, and it's a feeling that you don't necessarily get from the sort of the daytime run of RNZ, and I think the station benefits from it. And most of what we talk about today isn't actually about First Up. It's really about his path to that show. I first became aware of Nathan watching Ice TV as a teenager, a 3-hour-long show on Saturday afternoons that just acres of space to fill, not a huge amount of resource like a classic New Zealand media setup. And it certainly for me felt like it was the beginnings of how a kind of an alternative youth culture was expressed on television in this country. And along with Max TV, which he was also a part of, which was an Auckland independent music TV channel, it allowed people to express themselves and try different things. And where the dominant tone of New Zealand broadcasting was quite stiff and quite desperate to appear the same way as the sort of BBC or whatever Anglophile kind of culture had created a lot of our work to that point, there was just something different and our own about Ice TV. He went on to have a key role with Brotown, and we touch on that, and also talk about his year spent in a kind of wilderness. He talks about being on Pluto and drifting further away from the sun during his period on live sport, and speaks very candidly and I think quite affectingly about the sort of trials and tribulations of a broadcasting lifer and the things that you have to accept. And I don't know, what do you have to accept them? I don't think that this industry necessarily looks after its people all that well at times, and he speaks very candidly about that. But ultimately, he's landed in the right place, and I think what he describes about the sort of the chemistry of the people who make First Up, and in those weird hours, both the audience, the producers and staff and so on, there's something really quite compelling about it, and I think a lesson in how you make good media. So if you listen to this pod, then hopefully you're interested in that and you'll get something out of it. So this is Nathan Rarere, host of First Up on The Fold. Kia ora, Nathan, and welcome to The Fold.
Kia ora, thank you very much. It's fancy. I like your fancy offices.
Well, this is the first time I've recorded The Fold in here. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, it's very new.
Okay, good.
I wanted to ask, because you are a real broadcasting lifer in that you were doing radio while still in high school.
Yeah.
Do you want to just tell me about that? What attracted you to it and how you sort of managed? Because I think it was like a midnight till 6 a.m. shift, which doesn't feel super conducive to getting your studies done.
Well, strangely, here we are in April 2022, and there's a cyclone on the way to hit the North Island. And when I was in sixth form at school, year 12, we used to do these Wednesday afternoon things called sixth form transition. And you'd go out to different things, and we were doing a media week. And I ended up at the radio station that day, and a mate of mine went with the Herald Tribune, which was the local paper. And that was huge news in Hawke's Bay because, you know, the levee's busting and all sorts of that. And then I'm up at the radio station, 93 FM it was called, and that was the station that I remember it coming on when I was at intermediate, and it was so exciting. Like, we are going to have FM radio and then songs that you hadn't heard before, and then, wow, you know, this is cool. And there was something that drew me to it. I liked it, and I remember that there used to be a show on AM, and this guy, Wayne Mowat, and it was like the all-nighter of New Zealand, and there would be people from Nelson talking or, you know, messages from people from Nelson, people from Whangarei, people from, you know, Darfield, places I hadn't really heard of or even contemplated even existed in Hawke's Bay, because you've got that big line of the Rangers around you to hem you in. And it felt to me like, what a cool connection with everything out there. So I'm up at the radio station at the time, and I remember just looking around and thought to myself, this is kind of fun. And there was a copywriter there who walked past us, and there was a chair, and he sort of walked past and went, excuse me, and stood on the seat of it and pushed the back down with his foot and kept walking. And I thought, that's pretty cool, you know, to do that.
That is incredibly cool.
You know,
Still.
he was a cool guy. He was like, that guy's the coolest. And then we met the general manager, and he was talking to us about radio and stuff. And I looked across the table, and I thought, that old guy knows every song on the top 20. And I think my mum wouldn't know any of them. And there was something that I was really drawn to it, and I just liked the buttons. I liked the lights. I was really drawn to it that way. And then the next year I went away on a Rotary exchange to Canada, and one of the people in the Rotary Club that I was with owned a radio station. So they had me in as a guest a couple of times, and then I went in and put my headphones on, and I was just hooked. I thought it was great. The little red light went on. I was like, this is really fun. Like, I'm like Wayne Mowat now. You know, I'm talking to people, and there's a whole lot of strangers who I don't know. And, you know, I'm a typical nervous kid. You know, they got me something to say, and they thought my accent was funny. And so then when I got back, I tried to get, because I'd taken up psychology when I was over there, and I was really fascinated by the human mind and also sociology, like how do we work as bunches of people? And, you know, so these were high school subjects that I took because I couldn't take them in New Zealand. Like, you know, then we had, geo, history, maths, maths with stats, you know, something like that. And I got there at my prospectus at Churchill, and I looked down and I'm like, what is sociology? I'm going to do that. What is anthropology? Okay, just anything with an ology, and I got into those. And so I think I became fascinated with just how people work, and came back. I wanted to go to Victoria. They said, you can't use these credits. So I went back to high school. And then while I was there, I went up in the middle of the year to see a friend of mine who I'd been in the debating team with, because I wanted to learn how to debate early on, because my sister was really good at arguing. So I thought, right, I'm going to beat her in one of these, and I never have. And there was a guy that worked there, and I went up after school, and I went to see him. And as luck would have it, the boss came out and said to me, okay, come in. And I went, okay, and sat in his room, and he said, like, do you, so you want a job then, do you? And I went, yeah. And he went, okay. So we had a little chat, and he's talking about things I could do, and that was being the carting boy, you know, taking the pre-recorded ads and putting them on a little cart. And then he said to me, okay, well, cheers, Brad. That'll be great. And I said, oh, it's Nathan. And he goes, oh, I thought it was Brad. Okay, cool. There you go. And there's a guy who looked like me at school called Brad, who'd been going out with his CV all the time to...
Poor Brad's out there, and you've stolen his whole career.
Brad's a dentist. Brad did fine. Brad's probably got three Teslas, thank you very much. So, but then I ended up being the carting kid, and that was my job, as I'd bike up after school. And so doing that, I learned how to use new toys, because I'd always been one of those ones at home that was fascinated by, like, you know, why does the Dolby NR button exist? Why does this high-speed dub? And, you know, when we got VHS machines, I was like, wait, I can plug this into the stereo and I can put music on things, you know, and that was my own little lab there in Frimley and Hastings is what I did. So that felt to me like a cool thing. Like, I honestly felt like I was in the Starship Enterprise. It was these buttons and records and sliders and what have you. And then it was about halfway through the year, and one of our staff faxed our playlist to his mate at the opposition as a bit of a show-off, so he got fired. The replacements were away, and the boss comes over and goes, hey, Nathan, you know how to use the desk, right? I said, yeah. And he went, look, can we pay you to do a midnight till dawn? And I was like, oh. So I rang home and my mum and dad were like, suppose so. So I biked home and then I biked back in at like 11:30 at night in my uniform. And then I went and I did the midnight till 6 a.m. show. And all they wanted me to do was read the weather at the top and then just push the buttons and just be there in the morning to do like 2 hours for the breakfast host. And so I did my weather, and then I started out, and I still remember it. It was Cart 77, and it was Taylor Dane, and I went boom, and I hit play, and I zoomed back in my chair, and I thought, this is it. This is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me.
It's the big time.
This is it. This was my dream. These were all my dreams coming true. And if I never got to do it again, I was going to remember this. But the phone started going crazy, and I'm like, they love me. And then I realised I was playing it in queue. So, so about the first minute and a half is that, and the hotline goes, and it's the boss going, look, just, pay attention. In the end, I'm pushing the buttons and I'm playing the music, and this is before automation. So, there was always something to do. It's like driving a manual car. And then I got through till 6 a.m, and our replacement breakfast host, who was filling in at the time, was Jehovah's Witness. And he said to me, hey, I can't read birthday calls because they're a pagan ceremony. Can you read them? And I thought, oh, not when people are listening. But one of my things at school had been, we had about 5 class clowns. It was amazing. So it was such a great thing to have. And I'd been doing theatre sports and what have you. And I'd got into doing voices and stuff. And he said, well, just do them in one of the voices. So we created this character who was a sort of split of my English teacher at the time. And he just was like this lovable nerd who'd come up from Masterton and worked at the station. So I read it out in a character voice. And then they said to me, hey, can you do another mid-dawn? And then the next day the guy comes in and he's written some jokes for me to do. And then next thing, Nigel Neville was his name. Nigel Neville became this like living cartoon character. And they said to me, why don't you just do mid-dawns? Do you want to do it full time? So I went, okay. So I had to figure out a way to make it work. So this is heading towards exams time now at school. And I had a teacher at school, Greg Cook, who'd done student radio. And he got it and he said to me, it's awesome, isn't it? I said, it really is. So I could come to school in the morning until lunchtime. He'd talk me through with my teachers what was going to be happening that afternoon. And then I would bike home and I'd go to sleep. And then my dad would wake me up at like 11 o'clock at night by just pulling the duvet off and going, oh, off we go. And then I'd bike into town and do my mid-dawns. And that's really the story of where it came from, was the ability to do funny voices in right place, right time.
That's incredible. And obviously you're back on that first love medium now, which we'll get to later on. But I wanted to spend some time talking about Ice TV, which, I would have been in my mid-teens when it started. I moved over from the UK, and I remember it as feeling like it was like quite a revolutionary show at the time. Like I was seeing a kind of youth culture from Aotearoa that had its own kind of sensibility. It almost felt like, looking back, and I can't tell to what extent I've sort of shaped this in my memory, but the seeds of some of the weird comedy that grew out of the sort of 2000s in New Zealand, and it had music, and it was, like it had you and Petra and John Bridges, these very kind of like fresh personalities that seemed generationally different to what had gone before. And it was this very successful show that ran for a long time. Tell me about what Ice TV was for those who haven't had the pleasure of watching it, and why it sort of seemed to hit, do you think?
Why is hard because, like some things you can think out the greatest thought out, the greatest researched out thing in the world, and you chuck it out there and does nothing. And then other things, someone, going viral. Basically, this was the old days of going viral. So it was a show that was on for 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon. And the idea is that TV3 at the time had bought the rights to the one-day cricket for the summer. So they needed something to fill in during the winter months. So they had 30 weeks spare. So they came to a couple of producers, and Stephen J. Campbell being one of them, Richard Driver being another, and Jude Anaru. So Jude Anaru had come from BFM. She'd been a PD there. And so to me, she really got cool. And she understood it and that as well. And they said to Jude, right, we're going to give you this show to do, so give us a youth show. and you got to fill in 3 hours, which when you think about it a week is a ridiculous amount of
So
television
phenomenal length of time to be creating. Yeah.
And I hate to be a little back in my day, but that was very slow editing that you couldn't just go click, click, click and do things, which actually is weird. I was, at the time I was a copywriter and doing some radio as well at a place called Studio Time. And I remember that just before that, they'd bought in the first time we'd ever seen digital audio equipment. So of course it comes in, and we were used to cutting on a big 8-track. And I remember we were watching the display and we're like, wow, we could do like 2 ads a day on this, and that was just like, oh, do you think we could? Do you reckon 3? Oh, geez, that'd be pushing it. Then, of course, later on, you're pumping out 75 ads for some Ford dealer, because they want these different ones. But so Ice TV was that. Number one, it was to fill in those 3 hours really, and then fill it in with pop culture. But at the same time, they were making melody rules. So they were going into that dive of TV3 going, right, we're going to get this New Zealand on-air money. We're going to make New Zealand productions, and we're going to have a go at these things. And that was Jeff Stephen that headed that up. And actually, when you think about it, she actually took a massive amount of bravery, because New Zealand leading up to that, particularly in the 80s and stuff, had a real cultural cringe about itself.
Hugely.
And if things were made in New Zealand, it's probably not very good. Is that one of our movies? Oh, imagine that. Oh, imagine our music. And it was only when people overseas recognised them that they were, taken until, Crowded House. Oh, it's Crowded House. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Split Ends seemed to be the only ones that everyone loved, them and Herbs.
But there wasn't even, it felt like it was an alternative culture in a way that hadn't particularly, certainly that I was aware as a teenager at the time, expressed on television. That was, there was obviously alternative cultures on BFM, and I think Max TV might have been around at the same time.
I was at Max, yeah.
Right. I mean, and that was extraordinary, certainly in my mind. That was electric.
That probably shaped more for me creatively than Ice TV did. But at the time, I had 2 years doing a show. So we did a show on Wednesday night called Box Dog. And Box Dog was basically a whole bunch of guys from advertising agencies. And I'd been doing some work at Mojo. And you're writing ads all week about tyres and clothes and that. And then Luke
Living the dream.
Yeah. And then Luke Nola was set loose on the colour copier at Colenso, and then just created these incredible characters. Now, there is still Box Dog stuff on Facebook and stuff like that as well. And that was my first brush with celebrity, I would say, because I remember we were a Wednesday night, very small cult show. And then I remember one night coming out, there'd been some roadworks out in front of my house, and these guys, I waved, and I was like, hi. And I thought, was that? And I come back and they'd painted Box Dog and tar right outside my house. And I was like, wow, this is weird. And the whole point of Box Dog, we had, the author Chad Taylor. So Chad is a novelist, and Chad's great. Chad's a really good gauge of what is funny. And it's like Graham Chapman's role in Monty Python. Like they always said, if Graham laughed, yep, it's funny. So our show was, we'd do the show, and it was a single locked off camera, and it was very, very lo-fi, and everyone else sat out in the back room, and you did your sketches. So I played the host role, which was like straight man to all the gags. And if you heard Chad in the background going, then you knew it was a good one. And that was victory, yes, made Chad laugh. So, but while I was there, there were two guys that were very key to my philosophy of thinking. There was Steve Susi and Steve Asen, who were ad guys that now are directors and creatives extraordinaire. And they were talking to me about why New Zealand had that cringe. And they said, because we have really low budgets, but we want to make it look like we've got a big budget. And that never, ever works. So what you should do is own up to low budget. So this whole thing, we're owning up to low budget. And every now and then the microphone would crap out. So we had this blue lighting gel that we used to just put in front of the camera and just bring it up as if the studio was slowly filling with water. And then people coming in and just doing fake fish stuff and blowing bubbles in the end. Because it happened quite regularly just because the equipment was really cheap. And that's where I learned about, you could have a graphics department, or you just have a piece of cardboard that you bring up from the bottom of the screen with a pen and then back down. So when I got to Ice TV, I looked around. So John was a TV professional who I'd seen before, and I'd seen him as a stand-up comedian, and I was a huge fan of his. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. I'm working with John. I didn't really know Petra. Petra had come from Christchurch, also from doing music TV.
She was Cry TV down there, right?
Yeah, and it's quite striking when you walk in at that age to meet someone so confident and so sure of who they are. And I wasn't at all at that stage because I guess I'd got to Auckland and I'd been the funny guy at school and stuff. Then you get to Auckland and there's 1,000 of them, and it's like, okay, well, good luck standing out from this lot if you think you're just going to be funnier, because that's tough. So when we started doing stuff at ICE, I remember the very first shot of the show and it required bravery from Jude. So Jude was our producer, right? I think Jude, coming from BFM, she understood counterculture far more intrinsically than I did. And the others did. And so our opening shot of the show was I said, hey, let's have a camera follow me into the studio. And they didn't even give us a proper studio. So we were just in our office and we actually didn't have a makeup room. Like Petra did our makeup and we did it in the toilets. And there was a great day where John ended up accidentally with my makeup and I accidentally ended up with his. And we're sitting there doing camera checks and there's this giggling going on in our ears. And so we gave John a nickname for a while and it was like he was this character, hi, I'm strangely brown, because that was the thing. Like, John, are you wearing what's up with Nate's lights? And the lighting director's coming in, they're like, oh no, hang on, no, he's got. So I did whiteface, so I'd like to apologise for that. So and it was that, and we had these lights that were really, really low. But at the time, you had people so we didn't really have our own crew. We had the Nightline crew, and they were the new show, which at the time for TV3 fancied itself as being slightly different. So you had
a real specific kind of feel that was quite aside from the way that news had been presented anywhere.
Yes, it did, yeah. And so we had them coming in and we had these two directors, so they'd go week on, week off with doing us. And I think for them, what was nice was you spend a week doing death, taxes, murder, and then you get a week off to go and do that weird show that those kids are doing. And this is kind of fun. And what was neat was as they happened, they started to get more brave about how to do things and they started to come with ideas. And the camera crews were like, oh, this is kind of fun, because news camera people now all of a sudden came out and they were shooting stories with us. And we had one rule, no Dutch tilts, because there was this always this thing, whenever there's youth culture, they like to tip that camera on that tilt, on that angle, like, yeah, look at this is crazy. And Jude was like, no. And I'm so pleased she did that. Like, no, that stops and we're not having these. And so it just kind of developed that way. But it was the bravery of Jude to say, okay, you've got this time to fill, just fill it. Off you go. And she would sit there at the back and look really nervous at us. But the opening shot was you come in and I said, follow me in, and then I'll go in and I'll sit on the couch and we'll talk. And the camera people just froze and the director's like, no. It's like, why? Well, you'll see the cables and you'll see all the lighting and stuff.
But that was part of the show's charm. And that sort of aesthetic where you sort of show the working sort of became a signature of a whole bunch of shows, from...
Which is weird to think at the time, but yeah, you're right, it did, because it was never, it was seen as bad craft. But as I've been explaining to you, I love the buttons, I love the lights, I love all that, and I'm like, why wouldn't people want to see how the sausage is made, And
that's what defined it as different.
It developed its own charm because we were allowed to fail. And we had sketches that worked, and then we had ones that didn't work. And it's been interesting talking with Petra and John recently. I know that I'm quite definite about what I thought was good. And I think from theatre sports, I learnt that you've got to have a finish to go to. And as long as you know where you're all going to end up at, if someone shoots off on a tangent or does those things, as long as we know where we're going, there's no need to panic about what's happening. Because I still see presenter groups or hear presenter groups on air and they don't know where someone's taking a tangent and the other two will shut down because they're not sure. Whereas if you know where you're going, you just ad-lib it and you get there and it's great and you enjoy the journey along the way. But you've got to have supreme amount of trust in who you are with, and even better, you've got to have bosses that are prepared for 3 or 4 of those to fall flat on their face and then for some gold to happen. So that was great with Jude. But I remember that first year, I found it really hard. I felt the responsibility of the crew. I didn't want to ruin their work because I knew that they put a lot of love and effort into what they're doing. And a lot of it is just pressure you put on yourself because you're inexperienced. But Jude used to stand around behind the main camera and she had her arms folded and she'd just glare at me like that. And it wasn't until I got to the end of the year I said, can you please stop doing that? She goes, oh, sorry, I'm just
a ball attention.
Yeah. So and we did things like we went out and filmed on video, which at the time people hadn't done, and we shot some stuff and the editors were like, you can't use this isn't a TV camera. And we were, yeah it is. And that was just doing vox pops and stuff. And so a lot of it was ideas that we had seen. Like I had seen when I was living in Canada, I watched Much Music, which was their MTV, and there was a guy, Terry David Mulligan, who had I just thought a style where I just thought, oh, he seems like him. So I thought if I ever wanted to be on air, I'd want to be like TDM. And then Robert Rakiti was another just absolute showstopper. And when I first moved to Auckland to work in radio, I got to work with him. And that was like, I don't know. It was like,
he was a megastar at that time.
It was like working with Michael Jordan. You're just like, this is right. And they said, oh, you're gonna teach him how to write skits. I'm like, no, I'm not. He's Robert Rakiti. Are you crazy? But he was really good at being famous, which is I think is a really underrated thing. Like, he knew how to deal with profile. And I remember we were out somewhere doing something, and we were just sitting there having lunch, and there was a mum struggling with trying to get her trolley pushchair through the door, and Rob went, oh, and he got up and opened the door and just helped her out and stuff. And I remember thinking, oh, that's really cool. I hadn't thought of it because I'd wondered how, if I was ever like Rob, how I would handle things, So it's been a whole bunch of influences that came in, but it was really a massive team effort of people going, hey, let's just do this. But I know that Petra and John said that apparently I vetoed about 85% of the ideas because my thing was, but what's the ending? Like, where do we go? So, which I think might have been, I know I read a thing once where one of the bosses says I was a bit creatively scary to work with, and I don't know if that means that I had lots of ideas or if I crushed a lot of ideas, but I hope it wasn't crushing too many.
An idea that came after Ice TV was Brotown, which is probably the second big kind of cultural event of your career to that point, and a real landmark show that set in Morningside, which is where we
exactly
we are right now,
on purpose, by the way, too, for Oscar's mum's house value, but yes.
And you had, I think, 12 characters that you voiced in it, and that, like as a I mean, it's a cartoon, but it was a representation of Māori and particularly Pacifica life on screens, ran for a long time, a huge hit, which probably feels like we don't remember the scale of it as to the extent that it should be in a way. Tell me about that creative partnership and what that show meant to you and the audience. So,
look, I can't claim any of the creative start of that at all. That's Oscar and that's the Naked Samoans, and that was very much theirs. The arranged marriage of broadcasting, right? So I'm at TV3 after. So I left Ice TV with a year to go. I had a space in my head where I wasn't right for the show. I just wasn't fit for the show anymore. It just wasn't right. John and I were doing a breakfast show on Channel Z, and I'd pretty much transferred, I think, my creative love to that, because that was, again, you could do a lot of, very good creative ideas and push them. And Channel Z was kind of similar to Ice TV in that it wasn't one of the big cash cows, so you could probably experiment a little more without the sales department getting...
It feels like in New Zealand, some of the best stuff we've ever done and the best training grounds are when the bosses aren't really watching and there's just acres of time and enough resource to get it done, but not so much that you're sort of drowning in it.
Yeah, because you've got to be brave and you need to have brave bosses. But I think their bravery comes from how leaned on are they by a sales department? Like how vital is it for the advertiser that we told them we were going to hit these metrics, why aren't we hitting them in that? So I get put onto TV3 Rugby with Oscar Kitely, and we just hit it off straight away. Like when I got married, Oscar walked my wife down the aisle, which was pretty cool. And we've done holidays around the world together, and that was quite fun. Like, we went to Amsterdam and rented a houseboat for a week and wandered around and kept bumping into people that we knew. We went out in LA one night just to watch some rugby. Next minute,
as you do in LA.
Next minute, we're at the Chateau Marmont because one of the hobbits saw us from Lord of the Rings. He went, "Hey, the rugby guys, when you come out?" And so we end up wearing shorts and I had my slides on, and so of course they assumed those guys must be important, and we're inside the velvet rope, and people go to the Chateau Marmont and they stand around and they just stare at celebrities, and it's like we're in with the celebrities. And then because it was Sulla Baker was there who played Sauron, and he knew us as well. So next thing, there's the three of us just driving around Beverly Hills in this Jeep, doing those. So fun things happened around Oscar. But Brotown, he knew that part of my real other thing that I'd love to do was to be a cartoon character. So Os would hit me up every now and then for these, like, hey, hey man, yeah, can you do a German? Oh, I can give it a go. Okay, cool. Can you be in like 40 minutes? So I'd get in to go and do it, and to be around them, because when you watch a machine in action like they are, it's beautiful to see, like a creative group that are so in tune with each other, and something that might be just a passing comment that Mario makes becomes, a part of the show and a part of the sketch. So really, I mean, I feel like I'm one of those little birds on the back of a rhino. I got to be there, but I also got to live a dream doing it and get to be involved, and it was pretty cool. And like to have that up on the shelf is quite a nice little souvenir to have. So yeah, I mean, I didn't create any of that. I got to be a part of it though, and it was a nice thing to get to be a part of it.
The Fold is brought to you by O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to O Media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has the lowdown on everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. Join some of the superstars of the investment and business world as they share advice from their time in the US so you can make your mahi count in this massive market. The Investment Fix podcast, brought to you by Invest New Zealand. Tune in today.
So from there, you returned to radio in various guises, and
Yeah.
I want to spend some time talking about First Up, which we'll get to in a second. But you were there, and you just before we got on air, you talked about your first Zoom call. When you were at NZME and working at Radio Sport. Tell us about that if you don't mind.
So my other thing is that I've always loved sport. I've loved the community of it. I love rugby because that's my dad, and that was friends in my life that I wouldn't have been friends with. You become mates with, which are good. And I ended up actually, when I first moved out to Auckland, I did some coaching out at St Kennigan's with a little team, and that was great. And that was the team of none of these kids are going to be All Blacks, But the best bit was watching, and this sounds so cheesy, but it's true. At the start of the year, there were kids that weren't friends, and right at the end of the year, we played our last game against one of the schools, and they turned around, oh, do you want to ride? And they're giving each other, and they were friends, and it was nice because I explained to them, because during that year, one of my good friends died of a brain aneurysm, and so I was away for about 2 or 3 weeks. And he was the captain of my rugby team at school. And I spoke about how, hey, when I was 14, when I was your age, we had this and this is great. And I got to know about these people, and you guys will be the same, and you'll rely on each other because you wouldn't have seen each other at school. So it was nice seeing that. So I always loved sport. So my little, I guess the way I worked and I thought about where my career might be after Channel Z was I made sure I was the sports reader, and I thought, right, I'm going to position myself as someone who could possibly do this. And I did a thing where I figured that all sports interviews are really boring, and so I would read the sports news every day in the news, but I just had the same audio clip, and it was Stephen Fleming. So no matter what sport it was, be it male, female, basketball, cricket, soccer, whatever, it was always a Stephen Fleming clip of like, both sides try the best, and certainly we'll try for next week. And even I found it funny. I just delighted in the fact when it was out of context, Stephen, it just doesn't work. I just loved that, like putting it in. And then at TV3, 2 of the heads of department there said, hey, do you want to come and do sport with us? So I did that. So I kind of positioned myself into sport. We did a station combined with the TAB at MediaWorks when I was there, and I was actually there for 7 years. But
that's right.
The problem was it felt like you were in Pluto, like you were a little AM station that they really didn't care too much about. And it was quite a weird time for my career because I felt myself getting further and further and further away from the sun, and if you're near the sun in your broadcasting career, all of a sudden one job begets another. But if you get further and further away, you're done. Like you are really done. And so I'd gone away. That station shut down. I produced a TV show for a year, which I'm no good at. Like I'm no good at tidying up the details. I'm just not. I can come up with things. If someone puts up the framing, I can do the jib really awesome, but I'm terrible at decorating. If that's a good way to sort of put it. Yeah. And then luckily, one of the guys that I was working with there was the producer at Radio Sport, and a position came up on the breakfast show, and they gave me a shot. And I think that was hard for people to accept. That were like, hang on, what's this bloody guy doing? Because it's the cathedral of sport.
Well, it is, but and that's always been a sort of tension with sports, right? Where it needs people to actually give it some fun. I mean, the bit that you just described with the Stephen Fleming audio, like it cries out for that, because otherwise, like if you leave sports people and organisations to their own devices, they'll make the most boring content in the world. And yet the best New Zealand sports stuff is whether it's Sports Cafe or Crowd Goes Wild or the ACC more latterly, has had a huge sense of humour about it and has loved it despite that rather than because of it. And so really that should have been something that, you should have been someone that Radio Sport targeted from a long way out. But I mean, it must have been amazing in some respects after feeling yourself drifting away to have arrived at that.
I cried. I cried on the way home. I cried on the way to the studio the first time, because it just felt like, I'm getting another shot, and it felt like I was heading towards a really important station to go and work at. And
when was this?
This was the first time coming into Radio Sport. So you drive in the morning, the Sky Tower's there, I'm driving in from Te Atatu, it's first thing in the morning, and it just felt important and like, phew, I'm getting this other shot. And it just struck me strange on things like that. I just felt that there was just so much weird reverence for what Radio Sport had been 15 years ago. And that was always spoken about as, that'll be great. Hey, let's do this. You know what will happen? It's great if the All Blacks lose, because on Monday everyone will be all ripped up and they'll be trying to phone in on Monday. And it's like, and there was me and Mark, who I worked with, and the two of us were like, no, they've already done it on Twitter. What are you talking about? Like, so we felt very different thinkers, I guess, at that time. But we weren't the same as the other staff, because they'd all come up through those days. And
because they would have remembered that, I used to, when Murray Deaker would come on with that sermon from the mountain, and it was electrifying radio, because you watched the test, but you didn't know how to think about it until Murray explained.
Yeah, until Murray explained,
And then it was all on. Yeah, well, Brendan Telfer, Graham Hill was extraordinary. I mean, who was such brilliant talent. And he had that weird sensibility.
Yeah, he did too, and I loved Graham. Like to me, it'll be no surprise to you, he's one of my all-time greats. Like, to me, he's a Mount Rushmore New Zealand broadcaster. He's amazing. And I remember that I worked, when I worked at Live Sport, the other station, we had this young woman that came out of broadcasting school, and you spot them straight away, and you're going, bigger things are happening for you. You're just here temporarily, have a good time. And she said, right, I'm going to learn about sport. And she comes in on the Monday and she goes, right, so I watched rugby and I watched rugby league. And she says, it's funny, the rugby commentators all sit around like old men judging a driving test, like everything's wrong. And she goes, and then I watched the rugby league, and they're like the most easily amazed adult men on the planet. And I thought, but there's something good about that. And I think people were drawn across to the fun in that, because it should be fun. Like it is. Like the reason you go to those events, like I love my movies, I love that, but I've never actually jumped up out of my seat to do a thing like I have at a sports event, and with so many other people as well. And to me, that's the drug. Like that's the fun. That's that shared community experience of is a wonderful thing, and the tension that you have on and off. So I thought that the fun would be more a part of it.
And this is at Radio Sport.
Yeah, Radio Sport. And then I remember we went into a meeting towards the, and I kind of felt like it was targeted at me and another staff member to go, hey, this is how we do things here. And it was about, here's your listener, lives on the West Coast, watches every ball of a test match, hangs on it. When he can't watch it, he listens to it on the radio, what have you. And in my head, I'm thinking, no one does that apart from people that work here. Like, people love it and people care about it and people will check in, but they're not watching every ball. Like who's the person that can afford this lifestyle? That's incredible. And we don't talk about American sport and we don't talk about this. And the one thing I didn't get was, we don't like the hype of American sport, but how great's that atmosphere when they sing You'll Never Walk Alone at Liverpool. I'm like, how is that any different? It's no different. It's hype. It's fun. It's excitement. It's a shared experience they're looking forward to. So anyway, this carries on and then we lose the rights to the cricket. And there just seemed to be little things where you thought, why would they let that happen? This doesn't seem right. And then COVID starts and we have a meeting with the bosses and they say to us on the Friday, don't worry about things. Look, if things go bad, because we're not sure what will happen here, we'll just flick it to ZB and you guys from the breakfast show, you can come in and do overnights so they're getting paid. So do you mind doing that? And I was like, no, it's fine. We'll do that. And we were all okay. And so I'd had Monday off. I'd actually had some leave coming up at that stage, so I took it. And I get a text, and it's please be on a Zoom call. And I had no idea what a Zoom call was because we didn't before.
No,
we just didn't. And I'm like, okay, so I just what do I do? Push this link, and I get there, and then I come in and I notice there's all these boxes. I'm like, this is weird. This is all everyone from Radio Sport, and then in comes the word. Hello everyone. This is, whatever the name was, blah, blah, blah. I'm here with the CEO and the head of HR and someone. And as soon as I heard CEO and head of HR, because I've been let go from jobs before, as you do, I just leant back and went, oh shit, because I knew what was coming. And they just basically got rid of us all there on the Zoom call. And the bit that really got me was they didn't turn their cameras on. Like I'd been, when we got told at Channel Z, hey, you guys are too old now and we want something different, it hurts. It really hurts. But at the same time, someone else had been told that before I got that job. So I know that that's how it works, right?
Yeah.
But Brent Impey, who was he looked us in the eye and told us and, across the desk. And it's hard for Brent because Brent's known me as this cheeky 20-year-old that showed up at a radio awards once and went, hey man, how are you? And sat down to him and yabbered away. So he got rid of me that way. And then they asked us, hey, do you want to come back and do the show for a couple of weeks with the new host just to introduce him to the audience? And I drew the line there. I went, no. No, I'm being good about it now. And actually, I got our boss at the time, you have to write down your conditions for going. So I said, okay, well, I want my payout in cash and I want it in $20 notes that are not sequential and I want them in a briefcase. And
Sick.
I want you, Schusti, Sandra Schusterman, I said, we want you to deliver them to us. So what we did was we watched him go to the National Bank and he came out and then we phoned we said, go to Mount Eden and then hung up. So he drives up Mount Eden and then we just basically sent him on this goose chase around and eventually he met us down at, we went to Kelly Tarleton's, like, come to Kelly Tarleton's, and his name was on the door, and then we hid in the tunnel and then as he's going around the conveyor belt we could see him coming and then we were in this real dark bit and then we jumped out from behind and went, leave the briefcases and took it, and that's how we got our pay. Because I thought to myself, we'd had a really fun time and, no hard feelings. It's just, we're just not suitable anymore. Why not end that way? That was kind of fun.
That's surely the best way to take a redundancy.
Well, what are you going to do?
In broadcast history.
Of course, when I got home that day, I was gutted. I was absolutely gutted. And I was destroyed and I was embarrassed because you feel like, man, I've let the station
I feel like
down.
a verdict on you as well.
Yeah, you do. And there's something weird about, like, when it's hard when anyone loses a job, but when you've got a job that's got a public profile, sometimes that, I don't know, maybe it's not the same, but it just feels really publicly embarrassing. And so I thought, well, let's do that for a bit of fun. But then you zoom it forward to Radio Sport. And the thing was, they said, we just got the cameras turned off because it makes the internet flow easier. And then that was it. And then I just remember being left sitting, bobbing like a cork in the ocean, thinking, what am I going to do?
Especially because, at that time, it felt like the whole media particularly was caving in. So you lose your job there. Where's the next one coming from?
What was really nice was, though, all of the Radio Sport guys ended up in this whole, look, let's just try and help each other and let's support each other through this, which was a really nice thing, which I don't think people would look at and think, oh, the blokey of Radio Sport. No, we had Zoom calls and it was like, hey, doing, man, you okay? And this, I've got an interview at something, and then, that's cool. And one of them was like, well, I'm going to go to Teachers College. And so it was nice seeing that sort of carry on. And then there were the bit where a couple of them had, sorry, I've got survivor guilt because I've still got a job and I feel terrible for you. And it's like, don't feel terrible. None of this is you. We can feel gutted for this. And we had an idea, Mark and I, to try and do a podcast series. And the thing was, we'd actually thought of it after that meeting I told you about before with what the listener was. And we thought, no, we're not right for this. And we'd come up with this great, Mark Peart, I should say, when I say we, it was really Mark. He came up with let's do these broadcasts from Eden Park. We went to Eden Park. The Eden Park guy gave us a box to do it in, and this is going to be all good. So we were going to be the only ones doing this. And then what do broadcasters do when they're fired? They all want to do a podcast because everyone needs to hear what they have to say. And then we just got flooded with all these sports podcasts. It was like, no, at the time. So that was just me bouncing around. And then I asked my friend Willie McAllister, who worked at Radio New Zealand, like, is there any hope of anything? And he said, well, you could ask Richard Sutherland if there's any news reading. And I remember thinking, well, I'm not going to get news reading because I sound like this, and I don't. And then a guy, Jeremy Parkinson, who I knew from old radio days, used to play in the company cricket team together. He said, hey, I do this show called First Up. I'm the producer of it, and we've got this host, Indira, and she needs a sports journo. Do you want to do like a sports bit? And I went, okay. Cool. And he goes, right, so we'll ring you at 5:20. And I'm like, oh, well, I'll be making dinner. And then he goes, in the morning. And I'm like, okay. But then I knew that when I came, I had to bring something different rather than just reading out a box score. So I thought, right, I'm going to try and talk about it in a different way. Or just, I didn't purposely think in a different way. I thought, I'm going to talk about it in the way that I would like to. That's probably what I should say. I wasn't trying hard going, what's the crazy way I can talk about it?
And again, that's the license that you get by being off peak,
Yeah, totally, yeah. And so, and Indira was like, I'd just feed through, these are the 3 topics I want to talk about. And then I realised after a while, actually, I can just soapbox this. This is great. So off I went, and I realised the way that Indira tried to wrap you up when you were going over time. So I'd be really naughty and try and talk more without a break in the sentence. And it was good fun, and I got through that. So that just kept at least something coming in and just kept my brain going, because otherwise I think I just would have sat there sad, wondering what the heck I was going to do. Like, I looked at buying a courier van, and that was so expensive to buy, and how to do those sorts of runs. I had a look at teaching. I had a look at another job for the Ministry of Education, because my other big thing is I'm very, very into education at the moment. My sister is a area manager for MOE. My mum was a headmaster. It's the second school board that I've been on at the moment at Hobsonville Point, and I like what's happening and the way that they're teaching and the way they're doing things. So I like that. And I thought, well, maybe that might be where I want to go. And then I was right place, right time again, where Indira goes to breakfast because John Campbell goes, I want you. So she goes and jumps in front of the camera there and does a great gig. And they had no one to host it. So I thought, why not?
Not me?
I'll chuck my name in. So I entered, I put my CV in and typed it in and chucked it in. And then next thing, Pip Keen, who's the boss, rings me and says, can I have a yarn to you about this? And it was pretty cool. So because I'd known Pip as a bit of a, like, that's a name. That's like having Lorne Michaels come and speak to you. It's like, oh, wow, Pip Keen, okay. And because I knew that she was this young tyro who arrived, that Paul Holmes went, that one. You can spot them as well, like her, and then with John Campbell and what have you. And so she came out to talk to me, and we spoke about things, and I think I was probably at a different stage of life where rather than just taking a job, I thought, no, but I've got to make sure I'm right for this, because, and I said to her, look, I'd like to, but I don't know if I sound right for Radio New Zealand, because I don't sound like proper enough, because to me, Radio New Zealand sounded very nice.
But I think that is why your First Up works so well, because it doesn't feel like the rest of RNZ, or actually any of the other super early shows. I'm showing a bit of my lifestyle here, that I hear the show and I've heard most of the early morning radio. But what I think that you've done so well with it, and why I wanted to have you on, is that there is hard news on here. Like, you're interviewing the finance minister, interviewing the deputy leader of the opposition every week. In
Ukraine.
And it's like, you're absolutely unafraid of tackling big news, and because you've got a slightly relaxed manner, sometimes I think you get more out of them than in a more adversarial format. But you also tell us about the frog. Yeah. The frogs in your yard. And I think that somehow those things which don't really make sense, if you're writing out the pitch, you'd be like, this is kind of a mess. It actually, it really sort of suits that sort of the time and the mood where you always feel like you're sort of alone with that as a radio listener, and I think it really fits. So, tell me about how you've managed to make those sort of two streams work, and the relationship with the audience, because it feels like, just as there is an RNZ, you're talking about an RNZ host archetype, then you don't feel like you're at. There's also like an RNZ listener archetype that's probably not a million miles away from their version of the West Coast radio sport person. And you just seem to have a different relationship with your people.
Well, Pip said to me at that day when I said, I don't know if I sound right. And she said, no, you sound like New Zealand, and this is called Radio New Zealand. and you will be fine. Just do your thing. And so when I first got there, like I've got Jeremy Parkinson as our EP in the morning, and I've known Jez for a really long time, so that felt comfortable to meet someone through the window there. Katrina Batten is, newsreader. She's wonderful with diction, wonderful with all that, but she's our panel operator, so she's my producer this way. And what's quite nice is we're of a similar vintage, the three of us, and they managed to get me in and teach me the way to do things. So Katrina was really good at going, no, that would do it this way and do this. And she realised early on that I don't mind being corrected. And I think a lot of people can take that super personally. Like, I'd just rather get it right. So I don't mind, if I've stuffed this up. And sometimes I'll do something and I'll, mispronounce something. Let's just say I go October or whatever, and in my ear I get October, just bang. It just comes in and very good with place names in Europe and things like that, and I'm fine with that. And one thing I realised early on was like, man, the RNZ audience love to correct you on stuff. They really do, how are they going to take me? And at first, as always, when you appear, people hate you for the first couple of weeks because you're not what they were used to and you're different to their routine. So what I've done throughout my career very early on, it was some advice I was given way back in that very first radio station day by my friend David Elliott, who later on went to fly planes and that in the Air Force. But he said, look, don't do all your tricks on the first day. Let them get to know you first and then do that, because you can't be the person that shows up at the party all wacky because people instantly think that guy's a dick. Like come in and do a bit of this and just work your way in. So I got in. At first I thought, And Pip had a really cool way of welcoming me in. So she had me sit there for 2 weeks to watch Indira do the show. From what does Indira do when she arrives? How does she sort that out? What does she do when she's in there? Watch how the show goes together. And then there was another presenter, Anna Thomas, and she said, I want you to watch Anna as well, because I don't want you to go in and just copy what Indira does. She said, you need to learn the process and then you'll make it your own. And in my head, it's just mind blowing. I thought, what an amazing level of understanding your front person and understanding how to get them into doing what they're doing. The other part was the resourcing that Radio New Zealand puts into things. And I think that what had happened is that 28 years of doing commercial radio, you're never doing something for the audience. It's always for the sales department. It always is. And it's a horrible realization to make, but it's true, because, you've got to secure the bag. You've got to pay the electricity, pay everyone, pay the other breakfast announcers Maserati, whatever it is, you've got to secure all that stuff as it comes in. So they just slowly let me develop. So really it started out, we had, it's Glenn Forsyth, the fruit guy. So Glenn is our fruit and veggies guy, the Minister of Fruit and Veg, and he's on Monday and Friday, and Jeremy would just go, call him the Minister of Fruit and Veg, because that's what Indira had called him. So that instantly let me go, oh, okay, you can be slightly here. So I was just taking my time to measure it and go. And then we decided that Glenn on Friday, because the thing I love about him is he cares so much, and I think people that care too much are the best guests for anything. And he would do Friday, and I went, hey, why don't we have him do a fruit of the week? So we had, Glenn, what's your fruit of the week? And he said, oh, it's whatever it was, apples. And I remember thinking, something's sort of missing here. And then Katrina and I workshop stuff. And by this stage, Katrina's starting to understand me more, because just want to explain to people, there's a real key to having the person that's running your studio, the massive amount of trust that you need in each other to sound comfortable to get there. But I'm, and then she goes, oh, so let's play something. So I found this ta-da kind of fanfare, which was about the most low-key one in the world, but it works.
And that's not a very RNZ thing either.
It just works. I didn't know.
But you're helping to loosen up a station that kind of needs to, like I think that you think about Morning Report's been running continuously for, probably thick end of 50 years. For most of that time, it's had Jeff Robinson as a host. Like the heritage can be oppressive if it's not allowed to evolve and grow. And that's where I think one of the roles that First Up has is, because it's sort of, it's a newish show by RNZ standards, and it's not under the bright lights. And you, with your personality and your background, you've got a license to play with it a bit, which I think is what the whole of the institution needs. Because
they trust me. Like they know now. Our journalists know, like Matt and Ella and Ellie, when they're out doing stories and they're doing these, they know that I'm not going to ruin it for them, and I'm not going to ruin their hard work for it. But, for example, when it's chats with deputy leaders of political parties or something like that, they'll send me notes beforehand that I can go and study and links to things and that. So I feel really prepared. and I don't feel like I can fail. And there's something about giving your front person that amount of confidence. I think because I'd always in my career, I hadn't really been a confident lead singer, but I'd been a confident sort of backup singer, I felt. And even in the Ice TV days, I felt safety in the other two. And whenever we'd walk anywhere, they were really good at being famous and I wasn't. So they were tall and beautiful. So I used to on purpose walk about 4 or 5 meters behind them everywhere, because I knew that as people turned to look at Petra and John, that was just cutting that angle of vision where I wouldn't be there, because I felt more comfortable doing that. And that's probably a family trait more than anything with us. But that just wasn't the level that I was at. So I do like radios that are not being looked at so much. But to have, now it's fun, and I'll go to Katrina, something like, or it's Katrina and Jeremy, we have our little chats in the morning out in the office, and I've got better now at just plucking little bits out and throwing those into bits of prep, like stuff that I found interesting beforehand to get in and change and do these things. And the correspondents get me now. They understand me now. So we've got fun ones in Japan and Britain and what have you. And then even the bit towards the end of the show, so about 1:45, there's the classic radio crossover. And that's the first bit where you go and you talk to like Susie Ferguson or Corin Dan or, Kim Hill or whoever is doing the show. And I love those chats. Like, it's quite fun. And I like my chats with Susie. They're great. I mean, my granddad came to New Zealand on a boat from Aberdeen. So I've always had a thing about Scottish people. And I love the accent. It feels so comforting and warm, and she can understand when I just chuck in a thing about iron brew or, black pudding or anything. She gets where I'm at, so it's nice to be able to do that. But I think to myself, well, why? I can talk to her like that, can't I? It's still my show now in these hours, and I know that she doesn't do things differently. But where it felt like, I'm okay, was actually when Kim Hill was filling in, and she comes in and we're talking, and it's funny, when Kim Hill's there, everyone sits up a little straighter, I'm like, oh, okay, so this is, and I knew of Kim Hill, and I was like, wow, so she's, again, Mount Rushmore, and she starts she started the ad lib. She starts talking about the coffee machine in Wellington and how it was broken and how stupid this was and it was terrible. And the next day we come back and I go, oh, how's the coffee machine? Well, and then she does this great little piece about it and it was so funny. And so I just said, did you give it a withering stare? And she laughed and so that was kind of fun. So I think that's when I felt like, oh, okay, I belong here and this is good. So what's nice is my 2 in the morning that are there with me, they let me try things, and Katrina is very good at giving me the face of the, nah, I didn't really work. And Jeremy is good as well, because Jeremy writes, he'll write little things. He always tries to Ron Jeremy me. He'll put like just put little bits in there just to make sure that I've done my stuff and I've done my pre-reading and what have you. But he likes to challenge me every now and then with, we'll do how much your New Zealand dollar is worth. And to me, reading that same top line of script every day, it just bores the heck out of me. So my mouth just finds a different way to say it. But he'll throw in the currencies that I haven't seen before that he chucks in about 5 minutes beforehand. And I know he's just sitting in the studio going, ha, 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 but again, that's nice. Like, it's a really good thing, I think, because I've always thought these jobs that we do, like, we don't work in abattoirs, we don't work on roads, we aren't doing really tough things, like we're not doing daycare. Imagine being a daycare teacher, my goodness. Like we're not dealing with mental health people or patients and that. Our job is fun. So if I leave and I get into the car and I feel like, yeah, we had fun today, to me I know it might sound cheesy and it might sound Pollyanna or whatever, but that's the honest truth. Like, I'm like, yeah, and that's why I'm here and that's why we do it. So hopefully if I did, the audience did too. And they seem to be buying into it. Like, we get we've got really funny listeners and they like to send back feedback questions and they like to send back funny things. And sometimes you'll throw out say send in your thoughts on this. No one sends their whakaaro in at all, and you're like, oh, okay. And then one you'll go and you don't think it's going to go anything, just goes huge. I mean, like, we did one about coffee the other week, the price of coffee, because Pam Corkery, about how it's going to be $7 in Brisbane for a flat white soon. And I was talking about, do you still actually like your coffees you made at home or whatever? And we had this great reply from a guy. It was really long. And in the end, Jeremy went, shall we just ring him after the show and record him? And he's Joe. He's one of our regular listeners and he's the head roaster at Havana Coffee. So we got this great interview with him about the process of it and why it costs more this. And then ended up going on a tangent, as I tend to, about him being in Tanna in Vanuatu, learning how to roast coffee, teaching people how to roast coffee up there and stuff. But that's that audience feedback that makes me feel like, yes, we're doing a good thing because it seems like people like it. And when you say I sound different than the others, it's like, yeah, I do because I have to, because I can't do what they do. Like, I can't be the sort of interviewer like Lisa Rowan is. I can't be or Susie or Corin. I don't have that about me. I don't have that way like Catherine does as well. I can't do that. But I still feel like I can chat to people and I can get information out of people that is just my way of getting it. And it is to have people feel comfortable so that we can both talk and they feel comfortable about saying things. And I might not harangue people on stuff, but sometimes you do the bit where you ask the question and then you just sit back because you know that it's like, okay, cool, you're saying this. You're saying this is being recorded and this sits here forever, so fine, you go for it, And I guess that's the philosophy of it, is like I was really worried about if I would fit in. I was really worried if I was doing well by RNZ. But I feel like I feel like I'm okay. Like, we just put together our radio awards entry, and I've been a judge on those for years and stuff. And I listened to our 10 minutes of the show, and what was cool was I got to the end of 10 minutes and I was like, oh, is there more? And I thought, oh, how neat. And it was everyone's work was in there, and there was the pride that was in it and the quality that was in it, and that felt really cool. That's like, okay, I think this is good. And I was saying to Katrina, look, even if we don't win an award, because it's up to the judges, right? I said, but that feels like I've gone somewhere and done a really good audition and that's the best I can do. And then they just decide if you're suitable. And if we're suitable to be the show that they think is what talk shows sound like now, then that's good. And if not, that's fine, because we're really happy with what we do. You heard that 10 minutes. She put it together. It's awesome. So we'll just keep doing what we do.
Yeah, well, I think that you're doing such a fantastic and really just quite specific and different job, and you can hear the level of trust that exists between the on and off air personnel and the audience. Yeah. And so keep doing it. Thank you so much for coming up.
Thank you.
On the fold.
And congratulations too, because I remember when you went out and did spin-off and went to this, and it was like, oh, this is interesting. This Duncan Grieve guys having a go at this. This is, that's ballsy. I remember we were having a chat about it at the time, and now walk in, you got offices and, and all that stuff. I mean, it's good. And I think people need, people need that level of bravery to jump out and do things, because you do need to evolve and you do need to change things. And you saw an evolution where you went, yep, using information, but I could do it a little different as well, and so it's been great to watch that. And, you read through it and you listen, watch your footage that you have and stuff now is great. So, congratulations to you, man. It's pretty cool.
I really appreciate that, Nathan. Thanks so much for coming up.
Cheers. Thank you.
The Fold is brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network, together with Vodafone. It was hosted by Duncan Grieve, produced by T.I. Hare Butler, with production management by Rachel LaRue and series production by Jane Yee. To find out how Vodafone can help you reach your personal and business potential, visit vodafone.co.nz.
That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to oOh!media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
K-pop to me means more than just listening to music. It's learning to be myself.
The spin-off's new documentary, K-Pollies, follows 3 Pacific youth obsessed with K-pop. In a one-off documentary, see what they've found in Korean pop culture and how they bridge it with their own.
When you start dressing, looking different, everyone side-eyes you. But in K-pop, they're just like, no, celebrate yourself.
Watch K-Pollies today at thespinoff.co.nz/videos. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.